Hello, this is Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II, and I am the co-chair, national co-chair for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, along with my co-chair, the Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris. We also tonight are gathering here for this Senate town hall, if you will, with the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign, and you'll hear from them in just a second. We recognize that these are very serious times. We are a nonpartisan organization, but we do engage in policy, and we are deeply concerned about policy. We know that one of the greatest policy-making bodies, in fact, the greatest policy-making body, most powerful body in the world is the United States Senate. Recently, we released a study entitled Unleashing the Power that looked at the power of poor and low wealth people across this country. It showed that 25% of the electorate are poor and low wealth. It showed that 1/3 of all poor and low wealth people live in the South. It showed that in 16 states, anywhere between 1% and 19% change in the number of poor and low wealth people that would actually vote, an increase in those actually voting, can fundamentally shift any election, governor, Senate, presidential. We've been working on shifting the narrative for more than 3 years with our campaign. On June 20th, 2020, we had more than 3 million people show up for the Poor People's Mass Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington, a digital gathering. More than 3 million people showed up, and hundreds of thousands of people took action. Poor people, low wealth people, low income persons, their advocates and their moral allies, people of every race, creed, color, and sexuality, who recognize that we cannot ignore 25% of this country's electorate and more than 43% of this country's population before COVID. During COVID and after COVID, that number will rise to over 50% of Americans will be facing poverty and low wealth. Over 50% of those in North Carolina, because of the devastation of COVID, will be facing poverty and low wealth. This is an issue of our time. And so tonight we begin a series of conversations with those who would seek to hold Senate seats in various states around the country, North Carolina being the first one that we're holding this focus. I want you to know that we send invitations to both candidates for this program at the same time. We thank Brother Cunningham, for agreeing to join us to respond to the priorities of poor and low wealth people in North Carolina, which are all too often in some ways ignored by politicians regardless of party. We have repeatedly emailed and called and sent even a certified letter to the Tues campaign. We've even had a person mention it to their staff person at Tuesdays with Tues. And we've not been able to get a response from the Tues campaign. Brother Tues chose not to show up for this tonight. We're still open in some ways to scheduling a town hall with Mr. Tues. But when I think about that, we offered this opportunity. And this is the opportunity that we're offering to everybody. And so he is not here, and we have to record that as so. We've given every opportunity for him to be here. Even though we have only one candidate, we would not take away from that candidate because another one would not show, because these issues are far too important. Thousands of you are now joining us from around the state, particularly to this live stream. We know that in North Carolina, 2.3 million people of color are poor and low wealth. 2.4 million white people are poor and low wealth in this country, in this state. And an astounding 56% of all the children in North Carolina are poor and low wealth. So this issue of poverty and low wealth is not an issue on the margins. It's not an issue just for one set of people. It is an issue for North Carolina. It is a place where we have to deeply consider what it means to be and not to seem when it comes to caring for all of our people. Thank you so much, Brother Cunningham, for joining us tonight. And I want to ask now Ms. Anna Blackburn, who's the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign. She's one of the 3 chairs, if she would bring us a 1-minute greeting at this time.
Buenas noches. Good evening. I'm Ana Ilarraza Blackburn. I'm one of the tri-chairs for the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign, along with Joyce Hobson Johnson and Elder Hannah Broom. We bring you greetings on behalf of the tri-chairs and the coordinating committee. We are a movement that votes. Voting is a tool to ensure the voices of the people are being heard. So we welcome our special guests, all of you that are coming in through live stream. We welcome you because we know that you understand the urgency of ensuring that the candidates that represent the people are lifting the people's agenda. So therefore, we are happy to have the candidates here in order to ensure that he is listening to the people's needs. He is listening to the people's voices and ensuring that the policies that move forward are the ones that represent the people. So we look forward to engaging, and we ask you to continue to follow the Poor People's Campaign as we continue across the state with various Senate town halls. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I also want to let everybody know on September the 14th, we will be hosting a National Moral Monday entitled Voting is Power Unleashed. And we will be inviting all of those persons that were with us on June 20th and even more to come on to be trained in voter protection and voter participation. We have 2 of the leading civil rights law groups in the country who have fought and won cases against voter suppression, Forward Together, led by Caitlin Swain, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, led by Sherlyn Eiffel. We also will have a focus on strategies for voter protection, voter participation. We also invited both candidates running for president. We invited the current president of Donald Trump, and we invited Vice President Biden. We received in the word back that Vice President Biden could come and address the gathering on next Monday as it relates to poverty and low wealth and what we call the 5 interlocking injustices and how they connect systemic racism and poverty and so forth. We have not heard from the current president, occupant of the White House, and we will proceed and we will make that known on next Monday. At this time, in his own way, I want to ask and invite Mr. Cal Cunningham to give his opening 5-minute statement and then to take 4 questions from persons impacted in North Carolina and then to respond to those questions accordingly. Brother Cunningham, thank you for being with us tonight.
Reverend Barber, first and foremost, thank you. Thank you and Reverend Theo Harris for your leadership of this incredibly important movement. Let me also thank our state leaders here in North Carolina, Ms. Blackburn, Ms. Johnson, Elder Broom. Thank you for the role that you're playing in this incredibly important time with issues and challenges that need your leadership, just like they need our nation's leadership and engagement. It's the question of how we lift up, advocate for, and put government on the side of our poor and low wealth people. How it is that for so long, Washington has left out and left behind, failed to address one of the greatest issues of this moment in America, persistent poverty. How do we lift each other up? How do we hear the voices of, in North Carolina, more than 4 million people who are poor and low wealth? How do we lift up their life experiences and then put government on the side of building a fair, more equitable, stronger, more participatory world? Now, as every campaign is, this is a question, a choice between candidates. I'm working hard to replace Tom Tillis, who holds this seat today, We know his record here in North Carolina. It's one that I will touch on briefly, and I'll be happy to answer questions about. Suffice it to say that in push and pull of politics, Senator Tillis has decided that there are things far more important than representing the people of North Carolina. He's put partisan interests, he's put special interests time and again ahead of North Carolina's interests. The issues we're talking about this evening should not have a Republican or Democrat. They should not have a partisan character to them. If you're going to be a senator for all of North Carolina, we have to confront the persistent challenges of poverty, deal with the challenge of racism, the ecological devastation that has been wrought. We have to deal with the challenge of militarism, religious nationalism that are all at the core of this Poor People's Campaign, the work that you're doing. So thank you for doing it. Instead of doing right by the people that he should be serving, Senator Tillis has turned his back, instead working for the corporate and special interests that are bankrolling him, typical of and captive to the corruption that has beset the United States Senate. And North Carolinians, most importantly, North Carolinians are paying the price, even as our nation struggles with this incredible global pandemic. Now, we know Senator Tillis's record, blocking Medicaid, gutting unemployment, voting against the issues and interests of the people of our state, never once in his years in power voting to raise the minimum wage. These are the wrong answers for North Carolina. This fall, I intend to replace him and put this seat to work for the people of North Carolina. Now, I'm deeply rooted in North Carolina. I grew up in the small town of Lexington, pork barbecue capital of the world, though I know some of my friends from Eastern North Carolina, Reverend, may speak otherwise. From a young age, I learned the value of hard work. My first job was at $3.35 an hour when that was the minimum wage. I spent summers, school breaks, working. My father was a small town attorney, and I learned about the fight for justice in the way he would come home at night, bring to the dinner table the stories of the neighbors that he had stood up for, often taking on some of the biggest interests in the world, in America, right there in the little courthouse in Lexington. I grew up to believe in the power of public service, active in youth group and scouting, doing mission work, building houses in the mountains. I believe firmly in the admonition that we be our brothers and sisters' keepers, that we find meaning in this life by serving each other. And so I'm deeply animated to serve the people of a state that I love very dearly, in a country that frankly I'm very patriotic about. And serving means making sure that the voices of those who have been left out and the voices of those who have been left behind are finally heard in the halls of the United States Senate. That's the kind of senator that I'll be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Cunningham. And as we prepare for the questions that we have, even in our campaign, when we disaggregated the numbers for the media who's here, we looked at some of the best scholarship from places like Columbia and Harvard and other places. And when we talk about poverty, we have to talk about those who make less than a living wage. That's why we say poverty, low wealth, low income. We have to talk about for numbers of veterans. There are veterans that are poor, veterans that are on food stamps. We have to talk about poverty, whether it's in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina or whether it's down in the sand hills of Eastern North Carolina. It is, as you say, an issue that affects all of us, poverty and low wealth. And we have been very clear in our agenda and looking at these matters that are not about Republican and Democrat, left versus right, but are really about what kind of nation, what kind of state will we be. So thank you so much for taking these matters seriously enough to come on and be with us on tonight. Our first question, we will now hear from Leania Wentz, and if I mispronounce that, correct me. She's from Asheville, North Carolina. She will take 1 minute and introduce herself, and then she will raise a question, And again, I believe there's an opportunity for a 5-minute response. Am I right, Rob? A 5-minute response, 4-minute response to her question.
Hello, Cal. My name's Lelania Wentz. I'm a mother of 4. I remarried 5 years ago. I remarried a man with 3 children. I'm a stay-at-home mom. He's an art teacher and a veteran. I cannot get health insurance for less than $400 a month. I can't get on his insurance. It's just unaffordable for me. We live in families rental, and we barely make it on my husband's salary. And my question to you would be, like, for the folks, like the 4.5 million, I believe it is, folks that are living in poverty in North Carolina, what kind of policies are you going to try to instill or enact to help people like us, people who are just living barely week to week, month to month, and have no health insurance and really are just, barely surviving? I would like to know what you would do.
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you for coming on, raising that question, knowing that there are 1 million people in North Carolina who lack health insurance, 500,000 people who were denied because we refuse in this state to expand Medicaid expansion, and more than 2 million people who make less than a living wage.
Also,
Brother Cal?
Look, first of all, let me add my thanks for you coming on and sharing your voice. Do I understand that's 4 total children or 7 total children in your household?
I have 5 daughters, 4 at home. My husband has 2 daughters, 1 son, so 3 children with his wife. So we have a blended family, and he supports them and us. So it's a tough go, but I stay at home for my children, and he's the breadwinner.
Are we freezing up?
Well,
Pardon?
I believe.
Yeah, you're good, Mr. Cunningham. You're just freezing up a little bit, so we're going to trust that it's caught up now, and you're all good to go now. Your 4 minutes.
Very good. Well, first, let me say the economy is tilted very steeply in favor of the wealthy few and against families like yours who are working to afford the cost of housing, education, medical care, making ends meet, and folks like Senator Tillis, who I hesitate even to mention, have done nothing to address the very questions that you are asking. I believe in raising wages. I've been campaigning on raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It should be a living wage in every community. I want to work to make sure that all Americans have quality and affordable health care, which is part of why I've been in the fight to expand Medicaid here in North Carolina to cover those who fall in the coverage gap today. But we would still have hundreds of thousands of North Carolinians without quality and affordable care if we don't also add a public option to the Affordable Care Act. That is, create another opportunity through a nonprofit, through perhaps opening up Medicaid further or Medicare for additional participation to make sure that every American has quality and affordable care. We need to make sure that we also break down barriers that limit the movement of capital to historically marginalized communities. For instance, in Black and brown communities where banks have redlined for too long. I'd be curious how in the world you get so many people under one roof. And I just saw one of your children come in to the room behind you. I've been campaigning on expanding the earned income tax credit. North Carolina used to have one when Senator Tom Tillis, as Speaker of the House, took it away. He raised taxes on almost 1 million low wealth and poor North Carolinians who are working hardest to get by. But I also hear that you have children, which is why I've proposed expanding and making refundable the child tax credit that would put $300 in your hands every month per child to help defray the costs of raising those children, feeding those children, providing care to those children. The combination of expanding the earned income tax credit and making refundable the child tax credit can be part of an elimination of poverty in America by those who have looked at this issue very carefully. Those are some of the policies that I've been campaigning on that I want to take to Washington in this Senate seat. But I know that while we're in town hall format, I'd love to hear from you if there are additional things on your mind that a senator should take to Washington to be your champion for your family.
Well, let's do that now with Seth Washington and Claudia Arizola. Both of them, one is a student at A&T, another one from Burlington. And we always do questions, Brother Cunningham, by bringing on voices. One of the things about our campaign is we don't have people speaking on behalf of folk. We let people speak on their own behalf and raise their own questions. Thank you, Lalenia. And I'm sure she would be open to you as well, touching base with her and others and Anna and the campaign who are on. We are serious about this issue of policy. Seth and Claudia, would you all introduce yourselves and raise your next question?
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Cunningham. My name is Kellen Seth Washington. It's nice to see you again. I know we had you at A&T. You came and you did a little town hall that the SGA put on. And I just want to introduce myself a little bit. I'll be a senior this year. My major is political science with a concentration of criminal justice. I've been involved in activism since I really touched down on A&T's campus. 2016, if anyone remembers, was the Rucho v. Common Cause case. And that systemically gerrymandered us pretty badly, right down the middle. So I had friends who would go to a different voting precinct than I would be zoned to. With that coming in, we went to various Board of Elections and we rallied on behalf of our campus because A&T sits in the heart of Black Greensboro. So that is a historical place and it is very big for the constituents in the area. So me and a few other colleagues, we rallied down there for a one-stop early polling site and marked paper ballots. And we were able to influence state legislators ultimately to be able to redraw those district lines. So we'd ultimately be in District 6 and not 6 and 13. So I've been involved a little bit. And so I'm just glad to be here and glad to be able to ask you some of these questions. But the current U.S. Senate has refused to restore the protections of the Voting Rights Act. Voter suppression is on the rise across the country. And while its target is at Black and brown communities, it hurts poor whites and other communities and undermines our democracy.
Thank you.
Now we hear from Claudia. Introduce yourself and asking the question.
Hello, Mr. Cunningham. My name is Claudia Diaz. I was actually born in Mexico City. I came to the United States when I was 6 years old as an undocumented minor. I finally became a citizen after many years, a lot of money, maintaining a very clean record. It's a very, very hard path to become a citizen. And I did it because there are a lot of Latinos who don't have that voice. And I needed to be that voice for my friends and for family who cannot have that voice. My son just turned 19, so he voted for the first time last year. And one of the things that was so hard for me to comprehend, when he went to vote, he had such a hard time. They asked him they asked him so many questions. And the only reason he stuck around is because I had been talking to him about voting for 10 years. Some of his friends just walked out because they simply did not want to stay there and answer these questions. And, he knows how important it is. He knows that he was voting not just for himself, but for everybody around him, for his community, for his family. And that's why this is so important to me. I recently returned to school. I am pursuing a peace and conflict studies degree. I have a full-time job. I still have a 13-year-old at home, and that's why I'm here today. So my question to you is, how are you addressing voter suppression, and what are your policy commitments if you are elected?
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Seth.
Yes, let me commend both of you for raising your voices about this incredibly important topic, because the fact that it has become the policy of one of the major political parties in America to make it harder to vote and to suppress the vote and to disrupt the vote, frankly, is a disgrace to the very principles that we are organized around as a society, as a democracy. We need to strengthen our democracy. We need to heal our democracy. We need to confront that corruption that is at the heart of the effort to keep, Claudia, you and your son away from the voting booth. And Seth, that you spoke very passionately about and very well about, and that is the gerrymandering phenomenon. That is the use of political power for elected representatives to choose their voters rather than to create fair districts where voters choose their elected representatives. Here's my the first set of policies that I put out in this campaign related to taking on the corruption in Washington and healing our democracy through reform. It includes dealing with the money that moves in our politics, overturning Citizens United. You may know that as the Supreme Court decision, Seth, much like the Rougeau decision, where the court got it wrong and allowed unlimited corporate spending in our politics. Seth, to speak directly to your point, we need to reenact the Voting Rights Act, particularly Section 5, which allows and requires the pre-clearance of our legislative districts as well as our voting laws by a Department of Justice that, second, needs new leadership, needs people who are committed to civil rights and voting rights in its senior ranks. As a member of the Senate, I need a new president to propose those new people to be in the senior ranks of the Department of Justice, to then, with a re-strengthened Section 5 Voting Rights Act, review those voting laws. And I think not just for racial issues and gerrymandering, but we need to include extreme partisan gerrymandering in what the Department of Justice and the courts review. We know this story all too well here in North Carolina, where statewide, the candidates who are, if you aggregate votes, a different party would hold the gavels in the state Senate and the state House today. Different policies would be being pursued in our name today, but another party holds those gavels because they have so balkanized and cut up the electorate that they hold power through a corrupt means. And Ms. Diaz, let me say this, because I'm the parent of two teenagers as well. Just a year or so ago, my daughter looked me in the eye. She was very angry at what she had seen on TV. And she turned her finger to me and she started wagging it at the breakfast table. I was running late to take them to school and we were supposed to get out the door. But Claudia, my daughter, then 17, looked me in the eye and she pointed and she said, "What are you going to do to fix it, Dad?" My daughter turned 18 in January. And in February, she and I walked into an early vote site and Dad's name was at the top of her ballot. You're bringing your son up right. We have to teach the next generation to participate in this democracy. Why? Because they will inherit the earth. They will inherit the keys to this democracy soon. And we are called, I think it is a moral calling, to leave the world in a better place for that next generation, to make sure that your 19-year-old, my 18-year-old, so that you and Seth and all of us here can take power and control and pass policies that make better this world so that we leave it better for that generation that follows us.
Thank you so much, Claudia and Seth and Brother Cunningham. Just one little short follow-up I want to mention because I don't, there are thousands of people that are on and the media is on, and sometimes people forget that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act means what's called pre-clearance. It means that when a law gets passed, it has to be tested to make sure it doesn't violate. Without having pre-clearance, then that means the law can go into effect and actually disenfranchise people and then later on be overturned by the courts. I was going to ask Senator Tillis or our brother Tom Tillis this question, but since he did not show, I want to ask it to you. And that is, how do you feel coming from a state where the federal courts, and actually it was 2 white judges and 1 African American, looked at the laws passed when Brother Tillis was leading the state legislature, the House portion of it, and declared in the year 2000, in the 21st century, that this state's legislature had passed a law that engaged in racism with surgical precision. I wanted to ask him that, how do you feel about that? And how does he feel about the fact that today, as we're on this line, it's been 2,632 days since Mitch McConnell has blocked a vote on fixing the Voting Rights Act. 2,632 days ever since June 25th, 2013, when it was got. That's a long 2,632 days. I think Strom Thurmond did block the voting rights, the Civil Rights Act of 57 for like 1 day. How does that make you feel? If you could take a minute as a person in North Carolina, a citizen of North Carolina, that our state is known for this.
Reverend, those very words were spoken by none other than President Obama at Representative Lewis's funeral. As you well know, we are now stained with the fact that after the Shelby decision in 2013, after the Voting Rights Act was damaged so badly, what was described as a monster voter suppression bill was passed by Tom Tillis that needed to be struck down and was struck down for reducing early vote, for eliminating same-day registration, for putting incredibly restrictive voter ID provisions in place. I had to answer the nation's call as an Army reservist to go to Iraq and to go to Afghanistan to work to expand the rule of law and to help people in another part of the world gain power through democratic reform, only to come home and see it be the policy of Senator Tillis, then Speaker Tillis, and the Republican Party to take away people's rights, to make it harder to participate in our democracy. That's not fitting of this amazing experiment in self-government that is America. When people's voices are heard at the voting booth, when they ring loudest, we get policies that are legitimate. We get policies that work for the benefit of more people. We have a fairer, more successful government. We have a society that we're all proud to be a part of. It's a corruption when they bend the rules, they cheat in order to try to win. And why do they try to win? To hold power. And what do they do with that power? They pass laws that benefit the wealthiest Americans, the biggest corporations in the world. And it's the wrong answer for America. It's the wrong answer for North Carolina.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And for those of you that are on, you should know this Supreme Court, the current Supreme Court, actually upheld that law, did not overturn it. I think that says a whole lot about how racist that law was, and all because of the Voting Rights Act being gutted and because of the decisions at a state level. Now, next question, our third question. The questioner will come on now and introduce yourself and raise that question.
That one is for you, Reverend Barber.
Oh, it's for me. I had a birthday Sunday and I'm getting a little forgetful. and I think Reverend Liz has the last one, right?
Correct.
Correct. So Reverend Liz, go ahead and raise your question now. Since I'm the old man in the crowd.
Uh-oh.
All right.
So my name is Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, and I'm really pleased to be here. I'm the director of the Cairo Center and the co-chair with Reverend Barber of the Poor People's Campaign. I've been doing grassroots organizing amongst the poor and homeless and low income for 25 years. And as someone who as it plays out across the country and as we were just discussing in North Carolina. So my question is how do you define systemic racism, and what policies are in your platform there to address it?
Very powerful question, and thank you for that, because racism does not always manifest itself in the most obvious of ways. And the inequities that we have in our society today, we have to appreciate were not brought about by accident. They were brought about by the passage of laws, the pursuit of policies, and the practices, and even some people's hearts who don't recognize and appreciate the legacy that brings us forward to today. Institutional and structural racism is found embedded in and hidden in the institutions that inherit the legacy of the policies, practices, and laws that brought us forward to today. And we experience them with several examples that I could think of just off the top of my head, one of which is Black North Carolinians are experiencing this COVID crisis at twice the rate of the rest of the population. 22% of our people here in North Carolina are African American, but 38% of the positive COVID diagnoses and deaths are African American. Our brown brothers and sisters, Hispanic and Latinx, about 10% of North Carolina's population, but again, almost 40% of the positive diagnoses. Why? Because of health inequities. Because if you're Black or brown, you're more likely not to have quality, affordable health care. If you are Black or brown, you are more likely to be working in the economy in an essential, what's deemed an essential job in this moment, more likely to be at risk, exposing underlying structural barriers to health care, structural barriers to health, the communities that we live in, the jobs that we hold, the wages that we pay. And again, we did not get to this moment by accident. We will not move forward tearing down structural and institutional barriers to progress without intentionally identifying them, holding them up, shining a light on them in much the way that the Poor People's Campaign is doing. Once we identify them, then we can bring people together with thoughtful, serious, targeted solutions that tear down those barriers. We find in our system of education, in a state with as many HBCUs as any other state in the nation, maybe Georgia, but certainly the largest number of graduates of any state, a history of lack of funding at levels for comparable institutions. I think, Seth, you mentioned you're at A&T. There is a long history of difference in funding between two institutions, both in Guilford County, UNCG and NCA&T. That reveals a legacy, a structural barrier to progress, a lack of investment in your future, Mr. Washington, that needs to be rectified with thoughtful, intentional investments. So, Reverend Liz, going back to your question, we find the structural and institutional racism buried under the surface in the legacies that we inherit today that are not by accident. They were by design. Our efforts to overcome them similarly require thoughtful, intentional, and robust policy interventions.
Thank you so much, Reverend Liz, and thank you, Brother Cunningham. You know, we also in our campaign teach that structural racism, while targeted at Black people and brown people, hurts white people. For instance, voter suppression is targeted at Black people, but when voter suppression is engaged and people get elected through racist voter suppression, and then once they get elected, they block health care, they block living wages, as our first questioner said, it ends up hurting all people. And so racism structurally, systemically is actually anti-democracy. It's anti-equal protection under the law. Also, we know in this issue of policing, there's a bill now, bipartisan bill before the Senate right now, passed by the House, bipartisan, that says, look, we have to face the issue because bad policing undermines good police. It undermines community trust. When a gun and a badge, the right to serve a warrant, take somebody out of their home, is too much power for somebody who is a racist, too much power for a bigot. It's too much power for somebody that looks down on poor people. I don't care who they are. It is too much. And so in the midst of this cry that's been a historic cry, it's just been labeled now Black Lives Matter, but it's been the cry. You know, in North Carolina, we've seen African-American men who were scheduled to be killed on death row found to be innocent, right? They would be dead if the system had moved faster. And so it troubles us when the Attorney General just past week can basically suggest that there's no, racism. But on this issue of the bill that's bipartisan, that's sitting in the Senate, you were there. Would you be among those that would be saying, like McConnell, let's sit on the bill, let's not address these issues? Or would you be among those who were saying, look, we have to take this bill up from the House and we have to address recasting, reimagining, reevaluating policing in this country so that it does right by all people?
Reverend Barber, I intend not only to replace Tom Tillis in the Senate, but to replace him on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And why? It's because of questions exactly like the one that you just asked. And I've laid out in this campaign a whole series of thoughtful plans about how we reform law enforcement, drawing on the inspiration of the President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. It speaks exactly to the heart of one of your most important points just made, that law enforcement derives its legitimacy from the community in which it interacts. Law enforcement needs to be drawn from that community, known in that community, reflect the diversity of life experiences and complexions of that community. And in order to achieve that reform, I've laid out several thoughtful plans for how we raise standards, raise accreditation, ban practices like chokeholds, which, as I talk to law enforcement leaders, are not good practices. They're not. The notion that you would put a knee on the neck of any human being is not taught by law enforcement trainers. And so we need policies that eliminate it. We need policies that speak to it. We need to teach de-escalation. We need to require our law enforcement agents to intervene if they see one of their fellow officers doing wrong. These are the types of reforms encapsulated in that bipartisan legislation that you described, that I would be rolling up my sleeves to advance in the United States Senate. Calling in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, leading voices in this nation, both reformers, community advocates, and champions for those who have seen our criminal justice system fail, often Black and brown, but also often those without the means, those poor and low wealth citizens who can't, who experience the barriers to justice that are rooted in their inability to hire great counsel or to get the witnesses necessary into court or to get the experts that they have to get into court. We've got work to do to make sure that our courts and our criminal justice system draw their legitimacy from the people and then work to serve each other. There's a profound point in that 21st century policing report that our law enforcement should be guardians in our community, not warriors against our own people. And we have seen too often the fact that those who do wrong become warriors against our own people. And we've got to stop it. We've got to reform that culture. We've got to change hearts. We've got to bring change to make sure that law enforcement truly is guardians of our people.
Yeah, protect and serve. And thank you so much. Reverend Liz and I have traveled across this country even before now. Some of the people that talked to us the most about the need of reform were actually police persons. black and white, who said we got to deal with this racism. We got to deal with this wrong because it actually undermines our ability to do our job in terms of protecting and serving. And so that is a very serious issue. And thank you but also noting that racism also has other dimensions that we have to deal with. And that those other dimensions are not benign. People die when they don't get health care. People die when they have to live in poverty. People die from ecological devastation, and communities of color face, harsher, are closer to pollutants and those things. So thank you for letting us know that. Lastly, my question, pandemic. We have a pandemic committee of 3 PhDs in public health, one from Harvard, one from Drexel, and one from UCLA. And they have put together a team. And they said to us early on, pandemics always exploit the fissures of our society. And this pandemic is no different. Regardless of the inept responses to this pandemic, they said that if you don't address poverty and racism, pandemics exploit the fissures of systemic racism and poverty. And so here we are. Here we are with a disease, a virus that is a matter of national security, up nearly 200,000 people dead, many nonpartisan studies saying large percentages, one as high as over 50% of the people that died did not have to die, We have seen just simple things like wearing a mask being politicized. And just this evening, we saw the Senate take a $3 trillion offer that's needed to make sure that people are taken care of. People have stimulus, people have unemployment, people have sick leave, and cut it all the way down to $500 billion. When in fact, corporations were given $1.2 trillion back in March, I believe, without even going through the United States Senate. And now there are folks that want to argue that we don't have the money. And the current Senate leader seems, and I was going to ask Brother Tillis the same question. The current Senate leader is wanting to protect liability for corporations more than make sure people's lives are protected. And here we are in the South, in a state with 48, 49% poor and low wealth people. Here we are in the South where people are being hurt and harmed. As a candidate for senator, if you become senator, first 100 days, you got to address this issue because it's going to be with us. We're now hearing that the poverty numbers may be over 50% because of this. We are hearing from economists we are already in a Great Depression, and some people are going to be facing a great destruction. We are already hearing people afraid about this potential vaccines because the scientists are telling us so much is being done not to follow the process rather than to follow the process. What is your policy response to address this issue, and particularly from the bottom up, from those who are the essential workers, and poor people and disabled people who on many instances have been given a hand clap and given a name change from service worker to essential worker, but they've not been provided the essentials that they need. And lastly, knowing that from scholarship, that the longer we do not help poor and low wealth people and allow those fissures to exist, the more power we actually give COVID-19 to run rampant through our society. Talk to us about this COVID-19 and your response and what you see needs to be done as a senatorial candidate.
Well, first of all, Reverend, I think that this public health challenge, which is also an economic challenge, which I think you very well spoke, exposes fissures and inequities. As we discussed earlier, it exposes structural and institutional barriers to quality, affordable care. It underscores who is playing what role in this economy, who is more likely to be at risk. More likely they would, as we would say, to be in a job where they would shower after work rather than before work, more likely to punch a clock than to sit in the corner office at the top of a tower. We get to see firsthand who is most likely to be at risk. And so I've been listening to North Carolinians. I frankly think that listening is the foundation of leadership, and that nationally we need a lot more of that in our country. We suffer from a lack of empathy that starts with listening and engaging each other. So I've been listening, holding town halls, all 100 counties now in North Carolina we've touched. And what I've been raising, the way that we respond to this extraordinary failure of leadership, we've got to have a robust national response. Those who are most likely to be at risk, most likely to have lost a job, need unemployment assistance today. 5 weeks ago, the United States Senate allowed federal supplemental unemployment assistance to expire. It was 80% of how those who had lost their jobs were able to pay the bills, put food on their tables, cover the cost of rent, make sure that they can make a car payment in order to have transportation to get to it, to look for work. They're out of work for no fault of their own. Almost 800,000 North Carolinians today out of the workforce for no fault of their own. So I've been calling on unemployment extension. We need to make sure we close the healthcare gap by catching those who have come off employer-based care, expanding Medicaid, adopting the public option urgently and right now. I've been calling for support to the small businesses, and particularly, and boy, they even like to run ads about this on TV, criticizing me for calling for reforms to how we get the money in the hands of the small business owners, the people working in small business, because Black and brown North Carolinians were being cut out. And I raised a voice to make sure that we expanded the ways that we get that assistance. I've been calling for supplemental pay for essential workers. There's bipartisan support of all things. Mitt Romney from Utah, remember that name from 2012? He's in the Senate today. He's proposed a bipartisan way to put additional money in the hands of our essential workers in the middle of this. I think that's a good idea. We need to make sure our local governments, our state government, our teachers, our first responders, those delivering services at this essential time, they have the resources that they need. And then one of the most important things I hear as I travel and listen around North Carolina, at a time when we all need to work remotely, where Reverend, we join each other here on a computer screen, broadband connectivity, hundreds of thousands of North Carolinians without a connection or a device to connect on, disproportionately low wealth, poor people who need to be able to access the utility and the infrastructure of the year 2020. It's the very computer and the internet connection that we are on tonight. These are among the things I hear from North Carolinians that I'll be lifting up and working on.
Well, thank you so much, because indeed we know now that Wall Street doesn't tell the story of back street and dirt roads and country roads like here in North Carolina and anywhere else in this country. Wall Street only tells what's happening to the top 1% and the top 10%. People are hurting. And if anything, this pandemic has taught us something that Dr. King said: we are inextricably bound together. Something that Otto Schwammer said at MIT, and that is that we have a problem with our economic systems. And somebody asked him, what was it? He said, conscience, the problem of conscience. But conscience can kill, because conscience can kill a democracy. It can kill our economic systems. It can cause people literally to die. We are dealing with what one scholar calls necropolitics, the politics of who lives and who dies. And if you go into the United States Senate, that is a question that will be before you. How do you use your power to make sure that the first principle of our Declaration of Independence is activated and is operated upon? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I believe that anything that is not a policy that is not engaging in lifting life for all people and establishing justice and promoting the common, provided for the common defense and promoting the general welfare is in fact constitutionally inconsistent, morally indefensible, and also economically insane. Well, thank you for joining us. We learned a little bit tonight. Rob was right about the 30 minutes, and so I give him his props on that. But this was our first one, and we're glad that you came. We wish that Brother Tillis had joined us, but he did not, and that is of his own choice. We certainly made sure that all of the invites were out there, and we want the media to know that. We're going to give you an opportunity to take 1 minute, Brother Cunningham, and say whatever you want to say to the hundreds and thousands of people across the state who are connected to the Poor People's Campaign and beyond. Because as we said, this forum, brief as it is, we could go on for 2-3 hours. But what we are glad that by your presence, you are saying that you're not willing to ignore the 48% of the people in this state who are either poor or low income or who make less than a living wage. That in itself is an important statement. Because either we take care of all of us or really none of us are going to ultimately be okay.
Let me conclude with just a couple of quick thoughts, because I'm grateful to all of you, first of all, for this opportunity to address you. Keep lifting up the stories and voices that you are lifting up, because they will help us make better policy in America. For those of whom, those who are watching and listening that are in North Carolina, ballots are being mailed right now. And when you look at the U.S. Senate race, the second race on the ballot behind the presidential campaign, you'll see my name in the middle of a list of names. It says Cal Cunningham, but what's really on that ballot? What's really on that ballot is health care. What's on that ballot is a higher minimum wage. What's on that ballot is a good job with benefits, with paid leave. What's on that ballot is education, equal opportunity for all. What's on that ballot is the question of whether we'll connect all North Carolinians through infrastructure and broadband, where we will build a society where the voices of those in the voting booth will be loudest. And let me share with you this final thought in my very short time here, and that is, there are all sorts of political groups and interests, big money flowing in these races and these politics. But when you get that ballot, you have the same power. You have the same power as your neighbor. You have the same power as Senator Tom Tillis, and you've got to use it. Your voice will be stronger than any political action committee when you hold that ballot. You've got to fill it out. You've got to get it back in. You've got to make sure that if you don't decide to participate by mail, you identify your early vote site and you get there as soon as it's open. Again, you'll see my name on the ballot, but it's going to be your future. It's going to be the type of North Carolina that we leave to our children and our grandchildren. It's going to be the question of what America we start building come 2021. I'd be honored to be the United States Senator for North Carolina. I'll work hard at it. I'll work hard to engage with you, and I hope that you will hold me accountable to work on the very challenges that we're talking about this evening. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you so much, Brother Cunningham. If we ever needed to vote, Liz, we sure do need to vote now. Voting is power unleashed. 25% of the electorate in this country is now poor and low wealth. In North Carolina alone, if just 19% of poor and low wealth people who didn't vote the last time were to vote, they could make up the margin of victory of any candidate in the last election cycle. All over this country, that is the reality. Poor and low wealth people now have power to affect and impact. When I say poor and low wealth, I mean every race, creed, color, and sexuality. I mean the people who make this country work and work hard every day and who are the essential workers. I mean the people who often have been forgotten, but now are changing the narrative and building power. And we intend to be heard, and we are going forward together and not one step back. Thank you for this first Senate Town Hall. Where do we go next, Rob? We'll be heading toward
This week we'll be announcing the other states as they become confirmed, but this is the first of 7 that we'll be doing across the country.
That's right. Everybody join us on September the 14th. You all know it, North Carolina Moral Monday. Now it's the National Moral Monday. It is Voting is Power Unleashed. Join us next week, September 14th at 7 o'clock. You can go to our website. I'm sure all the information is on the screen where you can pick up information at the poorpeoplescampaign.org website. Join us. Millions of people will be doing it because indeed voting is power unleashed. Thank you so much. Have a great day. God bless you all.